Production funding for Ruckus has been provided by Fred and Lou Hartwig and viewers like you. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's great. I appreciate it. Welcome to Ruckus, that weekly food for thought fight over the news of the day and the trends of the times. I'm Mike Shannon. The Ruckettes join me shortly, and our topics tonight: the same-sex marriage saga continues in Kansas. The Chastain saga continues in Kansas City. He's talking about running for mayor. Really? And a really tough column blasting a Kansas politician, plus roast and toast from the panelists. But first, our Ruckus Newsmaker interview with Doug Bonney, Chief Counsel and Legal Director for the ACLU Foundation of Kansas. Now, those four letters, ACLU, evoke strong reactions, some positive and some not so friendly. The American Civil Liberties Union is often at the center of controversial news stories. Today, that is especially true in Kansas. The ACLU is actively supporting the effort to legalize same-sex marriage in the state. The ACLU's motto is, "Because freedom can't protect itself." Mr. Bonney, welcome. Does freedom need protection in Kansas right now?
Freedom always needs protection, and particularly in Kansas right now.
If somebody comes up to you at a party of some sort, someone you don't know, and you introduce yourself and you say, "I'm with the ACLU," and the person says, "Well, what do you do? What is the ACLU?" What do you tell that person?
I say it's the organization that protects your liberty.
How so?
In every way possible. Protects your free speech rights, your right to be free from government surveillance and intervention, and just everything you do.
When I was doing talk radio over a period of a couple of decades, whenever the topic of the ACLU came up, callers would call in and they would call the organization, and not always favorably, liberal. Is that fair to say in the political sense? Is the ACLU liberal, like one might say the Democratic Party is more liberal than the Republican Party?
No, I don't think that's fair. The ACLU is a civil libertarian organization dedicated to ensuring that the constitutional rights provided in the Bill of Rights and in the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution are protected.
Well, a lot of the cases you deal with in Kansas and in this area are not those kinds of cases that get national attention, am I right?
That's generally true. We have had some cases that got national attention.
Well, what kind of cases might you be involved with that don't generate massive headlines?
Oh, we're involved with lots of cases like that. Sometimes we don't seek headlines. For instance, we've been involved in working against police departments that are using cameras to surveil homes. We haven't sought a lot of publicity about that.
What's the status of the same-sex marriage case in Kansas? Marriage equality, I'm sure you prefer that term. What is the status now in the Kansas court system?
Our case was filed last Friday, so it's on a very fast track. Then Monday, we filed a motion for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction, and we've asked for a prompt hearing. I'm hoping to get that in the next day or two.
Can gay couples get marriage licenses now in Kansas, or does that vary depending on which county you are living in and going to?
Currently, no counties are issuing marriage licenses to same-sex couples.
Not even Johnson County?
No. The Kansas Supreme Court put a stop to that last Friday, which actually caused us to file our lawsuit a little quicker than we were intending.
Yeah, I'm sure there are people watching who will ask, what is a reasonable question? And I know there is a reasonable answer. They will say, I voted to ban same-sex marriage in the state of Kansas, and I was among the 70% of the electorate who voted that way. By what legal reasoning does a court overturn the public's decision?
Well, the legislature and the people can only enact laws that are consistent with the federal Constitution, because the federal Constitution is supreme.
Is there something in the federal Constitution dealing with marriage?
There's nothing explicitly in the federal Constitution that mentions marriage, but the brilliance of the framers when they wrote the Bill of Rights was that they used very general words and ensured the greatest possible liberty when they drafted the federal Constitution.
So the federal courts can overturn an amendment passed by the people of a state.
That's correct.
And ultimately, do you think this will or should go to the U.S. Supreme Court? Now, some think the Supreme Court is staying out of it by taking no action, by not hearing any of the cases this term. How do you think this is ultimately going to be resolved?
Hard to say.
Yeah.
My crystal ball is cloudy. And I was surprised that the Supreme Court didn't take any of the 7 cases that were up there last week. But I think by not taking them, they've decided the issue.
Okay, one final question and a quick answer, if you will. Is it your opinion that Kansas and all other 49 states will, in the not too distant future, permit same-sex marriages?
Yes.
And you think that could be within 6 months, a year?
It could be even quicker than that. I think it's going to be quicker than anybody thought.
It has moved at lightning pace, has it not?
Absolutely. Lightning.
Hey, thank you very much. Appreciate your time. That is Doug Bonney, the Chief Counsel and Legal Director for the ACLU Foundation of Kansas. Now it's time to start a ruckus, so let's meet the Ruckettes. Jim Heater is the President and CEO of the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce. Gwen Grant is President and CEO of the Urban League in Kansas City. Mary O'Halloran is a media and communications consultant, and Steve Marakian is a prominent and influential attorney with the firm of Wersch, Hobbs, and Marakian. This is not a sports show, but I think we do need to acknowledge the victory of the Kansas City Royals, win the American League pennant, now headed to the World Series. Here is our designated booster, Mary O'Halloran.
Oh, and I'm honored to have that role with all the other boosters here sitting to my side. We congratulate the Royals for the most magical, spectacular series of sports events this city has seen in decades. Thank you for the intensity of your play, the power of your bonding with each other, the sheer joy with which you leap through the air, catch those balls, and do the impossible. Thank you, Lorenzo Cain. You're my favorite player. I had to get that in. We're happy on Ruckus to congratulate you and happy for our city.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mary. Now, let's continue the discussion on same-sex marriage, or marriage equality if you prefer, in Kansas. Some legal analysts, including our guest, Mr. Bonney, believes the outcome is inevitable. Gay marriage will soon be legal here and in all 50 states. Do you agree with that assessment, Jim?
Well, you know, Mike, even though you introduced me as President and CEO of the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce, I should note that this is my first opportunity to appear with the Ruckus panel, and so it's nice to be with you and my Ruckus colleagues today. I should also make it clear that when I speak, the opinions are my own and not necessarily those of the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce. I would say this about marriage equality or same-sex marriage. Your question is, do I believe that will be the law in Kansas? The answer is I believe it will be the law in Kansas and in Missouri and a host of other states, because that is the societal trend. And I think state legislators and courts have recognized that. And I think that's a trend in our community, especially among younger citizens. I will also say, from the point of view of the Chamber of Commerce, that many of our leading members, the largest companies in Kansas City, are very supportive of issues of inclusiveness and diversity, as our chamber has always been. So I think it's something that's going to become a part of the fabric of America. And
have you ever seen society change its mind as quickly as this society has changed its mind about gay marriage?
You know, it's interesting because so much has happened in a relatively short period of time on an issue for which there's great controversy in the minds of a lot of people. But I think that's because the community, the greater community, had really made up its mind on this issue. And when it came to the fore in a more public way, really just in the last few years, I think the community was ready to make this change. And I think that's what's happening.
When do you think the way gay people have been portrayed in television programs, national media programs over the past several years has made a difference in how people perceive gay folks?
Yeah, I think so. I think whenever you have an opportunity to put forward a positive image, such as what's the popular show Modern Family, puts forth an image of a strong family with with a same-sex couple, and I think it does make a lot of difference. I think that the progress has been slow, actually, but here in the past few years, you've seen it
accelerate.
And I think that probably does play a role in it.
Lawyerly question for Mr. Marakian. Do you agree with Mr. Bonney's reasoning that the federal court can overturn the popular views of a state, an amendment to the state constitution?
Well, I understand his argument. I don't agree with the rationale. This has been my opposition to same-sex marriage has always been constitutionally based, not based on philosophy or morality or whatever. My concern has been that unless there has been a pronouncement by the Supreme Court or an amendment to the United States Constitution establishing a particular right, akin to the First Amendment or whatever, then marriage has always been, in our society, traditionally, not only a function of state law, but regulated and licensed by state law. So until we have a pronouncement by the Supreme Court saying that it is a right of privacy, as Mr. Bonney assumes, but has not been established, then it should be a matter of state legislature or state amendments. Federal courts do not have the authority under the Constitution to simply come in and say, because we disagree, we're going to set aside.
Hasn't that happened in a number of states?
And that's why, yes, and that's why I am disappointed that the Supreme Court decided to punt, because I think they need to resolve this. I think it's terribly unfair to gay couples throughout the United States to have to wait a couple of years to know whether or not, for example, if you're married in Iowa and you get transferred to Kansas, you can accept the job transfer because the Kansas statute or amendment might say we're not going to recognize it. The Supreme Court should have taken this issue now. They didn't. We have uncertainty. I agree with Jim. I believe they'll win in this lawsuit. I believe the 10th Circuit will affirm it. But ultimately, it's going to the U.S. Supreme Court.
If all 50 states do it without the U.S. Supreme Court acting, it's done.
They could, certainly.
But this is not only an important legal issue, as Jim and Steve and Gwen pointed out, but it is an intensely personal question, and one of deeply felt understanding of what your understanding of justice is. Martin Luther King said, "The arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice." And the intense personal understanding of it has come to the fore in families, is that gay people want the opportunity, like everyone else, to fall in love, to look into somebody's eyes, and in public, in front of their friends and family, say that they want a commitment for life to the person that they love, and to have that commitment respected in the community and accepted, well, not necessarily accepted, but have it be legal. That's what this is about on a personal level, and families are responding to their requests.
All right, we'll move on. Apparently, his appearance on Ruckus did not sway enough people to encourage former Kansas City City Councilman Dan Coffrin to challenge Mayor Sly James in next year's election. Now, this is not the first time Mr. Coffrin has walked up to the edge and then backed off. He did the same thing a decade ago when he began, then quickly ended, a challenge to Congressman Emanuel Cleaver. Never deterred by daunting challenges, Clay Chastain, defeated in 2 previous campaigns for mayor, is making himself available again. He's responding, he says, to a slew of petition signers who have pleaded with him to return to Kansas City. And he pledges to move here from Virginia if elected. So, Gwen, does he need to be checking out moving companies?
No. That's the short answer. No. We should not be taking Clay Chastain seriously at all. And it's unfortunate that we have to continue to have these conversations about Clay and his maneuvers as he's living outside of Kansas City. And anyone who would seek the mayor's office should be, by city ordinance, a resident of Kansas City, and not someone who's claiming that, well, I still have family there and all of these other ties here that would allow him to be eligible to run for mayor.
Well, if we rule out Clay Chastain, is Sly James just going to undergo a coronation, or do you hear of other people who may be thinking about running for mayor?
There are some unsubstantiated rumors that there may be some Northland interest in running someone, but those are unsubstantiated rumors. I don't think that there's anyone who is going to want to put their hat in the ring right now. To oppose Sly. He's a very popular mayor. He's been a very effective mayor. But on the other hand, I think that's unfortunate. I believe I think all elections should have some degree of competition and raise the level of discourse around what are important issues in our community. But because we have term limits, which I also don't like, I think it creates an atmosphere where why would you step up against a formidable incumbent like Sly James, who has a war chest of money sitting there? Why would you step up to oppose him when you can just wait 4 years and run unopposed?
Well, Jim, there's no one better connected than you. So what do you know about potential candidates?
I would make a couple of observations, Mike, and I make these as a former member of the Kansas City, Missouri City Council, a person who ran and served at large, meaning citywide, and who also ran unsuccessfully a number of years ago for mayor. I would say this, that it's important to think not only about the mayor's race, but also about the city council races. Sometimes people forget that we have a 12-member council, only 12 members, which is a pretty small council for a city of our size and diversity. And so those council seats are really important. So in addition to paying attention to the mayor's race, I think it's going to be very important, in part because of the term limits that Gwen cited. There's going to be a big turnover in this next council. And to make our former city manager government work, you have to have a good mayor, a good council, a good city manager. Right now we have all those. It'll be important in the next city elections to pay attention to the mayor's race and the council races.
Somebody's going to run. There will be a campaign for mayor and for these council seats, Mary. What are some of the topics that ought to be discussed once the campaign really begins?
What a great question. It's my favorite one. What ought to happen? Well, I guess both of you, in essence, the topics of, well, if the topic has to be why is the mayor popular and could anyone defeat him, the answer is no right now. But the topic that I hope will come up in a race is transit. I think it is the most pressing question about the long-term future of our community and what kind of progress can be made in commuter rail, in getting the streetcar connected to a rapid bus transit and other kinds of 21st century transit solutions to moving people from their homes to their jobs to their shopping and so on. And I know that crime is the #1 issue on people's minds in terms of the social life of our community. But that's the one that I hope. Transit is the issue that I hope will move forward.
Jim, could you tick off just quickly 2 or 3 other issues you think will be paramount in the mayor council races?
Well, I think transit's a really important issue, and what I would include in the list of transit items that Mary described, I would include the airport. Right. That's an important part of transport.
Downtown hotel?
All of those issues, I think, are going to be discussed in the coming election campaign. I think it's going to be a very interesting campaign in terms of issues.
Well, I hope that jobs creation and large-scale transformative economic development in the urban core will be a topic of discussion. I think that's where we need to be moving.
A couple of weeks back, the Kansas City Star's only local Republican columnist wrote what may be the most tepid political endorsement ever, supporting GOP incumbent Pat Roberts for the U.S. Senate. This past Sunday, Steve Rose wrote one of the most blistering columns in recent memory. The target, Kansas Secretary of State Chris Kobach, a Republican running for re-election. Rose claims he has never run across a meaner, nastier, more egomaniacal politician than Chris Kobach, and Rose adds, "I once met Richard Nixon." Rose had more to say. What is the Cliff Notes version, Steve?
Well, Steve's article was surprising to me because it was just, he's talking about how mean and mean-spirited Kobach is. It was the most mean and mean-spirited editorial. It really surprised me because it was such a personal attack. What his concern was, largely, is Kobach's dogged attack on what he believes is potential voter fraud, and his continued efforts to prevent illegal immigrants from obtaining certain rights that some illegal immigrants think they ought to have. Those are essentially the two things. And then, of course, it was magnified by Kobach's lawsuit when Chad Taylor tried to withdraw from the campaign. What surprises me about the editorial, he certainly entitles his opinions about Kobach, but he's a Republican who ran for Secretary of State on doing precisely what he has done. He got elected because people wanted him to do these things. So why is it a surprise that he's doing exactly what he was elected to do?
But wasn't Rose's thesis, stop Kobach now before he can run again? Sure. Meaning, don't let him win this race because then he's liable to be the next U.S. Senator or the next governor of Kansas.
Absolutely. But what I'm saying is that he's not going to be stopped because despite Steve Rose's personal views, which are fine, okay, the people of Kansas essentially support the initiatives that Kobach is sponsoring. And they always have the right. They always have the right to vote him out. But for Steve to attack the policies, that's fine. This was a very personal attack on someone who I guarantee you Steve Rose does not know personally.
Jim, as an individual and not as president and CEO of the Greater Kansas City Chamber, any reaction to Rose's column about Mr. Kobach?
Well, not really in this sense. I don't know Chris Kobach. I think I know virtually every elected official on both sides of the state line. I really don't know Mr. Kobach, so I don't have a personal opinion about him. I read Steve Rose's editorial with great interest. Let's just say this. I was very disappointed as an individual in the enormous efforts that he made to make sure there was a Democratic candidate by some name on the ballot. I thought that was a highly partisan move. Perhaps that's what you expect from an elected official, a Republican doing his job as Secretary of State. But I was just disappointed because it almost caused Kansas to miss the great opportunity to choose between incumbent Senator Pat Roberts and independent Greg Orman. So whether you're for or against either one of those, it's a great choice.
About that race, the Kansas City Star has now endorsed Mr. Orman against Pat Roberts. Does this not prove Roberts' allegation that Orman is simply another Democratic liberal, Gwen?
Please, Mike, please. What are you
A week ago, I interviewed the editorial page editor of the Star who said, yes, we're a liberal publication.
You want to ask me that question, Mike?
Yes, Steve, what's your... No, Gwen, go ahead.
No, I mean, they're a liberal publication, but I think, when and I've been in the room with the editorial board, and I've looked at some of the endorsements that they've done, and I don't think that they've always fallen down along totally liberal lines. And I think that they vetted both of those candidates and came out with the best recommendation.
Well, they endorsed Greg Orman.
The right recommendation.
Mike, because Pat Roberts has been in Washington for 47 years. And if I walk down my street in Prairie Village, I can guarantee you that I could not find one voting citizen who may have ever met Mr. Roberts, who Steve Rose once called the ghost senator, because he never shows up. No one ever sees him. They couldn't name one thing that he's done. They can name a whole host of things and people he's against. And he has moved to the radical right of the Republican Party so far that he didn't vote when the government was shut down. He didn't vote to
We got to wrap this segment up. Tea Party people
are
are now endorsing Roberts. Big help to him.
Absolutely. He's going to win. He like it or not, he's going to win. Greg Orman is nothing but a Democrat. People have finally figured that out. He's ahead by about 5.
All right.
He's trending up.
And it's time now for Roast and Toast, where the Ruckettes offer a pat on the back or a kick in the pants to people and events making the news. Let's start here with Mary.
Well, this week I want to toast the 500 Republicans in the state of Kansas who have decided that their candidate for governor is Paul Davis, and that his partner, Mrs. Docking, should be elected also as our lieutenant governor. These people are current office holders or past office holders, educators, leaders in their communities, all Republicans who, from their point of view, continuing to go on with Mr. Brownback, who has a $1.3 billion budget deficit, is the most dangerous vote they could ever cast. Good for the Republicans for Mr. Davis.
Mike, my toast is to the fans of the Kansas City Royals. Myself and my wife, Judy included, we've been loyal season ticket holders for more than 29 years. We have fabulous seats right behind home plate. And we were privileged to be there at Game 6 and Game 7 in the 1985 World Series. And suffice it to say, there's been a little bit of a drought between now and then. So we've had a lot of fun. The whole community's had a lot of fun with the Royals this season. But here's a toast to the Royals fans for sticking with the Royals for all those years. A toast to the Royals fans.
Gwen is volunteering to go to the World Series game with you.
Steve. Lots of volunteers for that.
Steve.
My toast is for the National Park Service. At a time when border agents allow hundreds of thousands of illegals to walk into the U.S., no questions asked, people with Ebola are flying in from West Africa day and night, non-citizens are permitted to vote without a photo ID. I, a military veteran and citizen of this country, and I don't have Ebola, was turned away from Rocky Mountain National Park because, you guessed it, I did not have a photo ID. To paraphrase the sainted Ronald Reagan, I paid for this part, Mr. Green.
Gwen.
I'm roasting the CDC for the mishandling of the protocols with respect to the treatment and care for patients with Ebola in the United States. The fact that the nurse who cared for the patient who recently passed away was allowed to get on an airplane and travel with some 115 other passengers is totally unconscionable. We are at risk of serious spreading of a disease that I don't believe the CDC truly understands. And when you're not clear, you should be cautious.
And finally, my toast is to two prominent Kansas City, Kansas Democrats who have announced their support for Republican Governor Sam Brownback's reelection. One is Nathan Barnes, a former county commissioner. The other and more remarkable supporter is Alfred Murguia. Murguia has a brother and sister, both serving as federal judges, both appointed by Democratic presidents, and another sister who is the national head of La Raza. A bit of advice, Al, you may want to skip the next family dinner. And that is Ruckus for this week. Back next Thursday at 7 with guest panelist Crosby Kemper III and former Councilman Terry Riley. Thanks, Jim, for being with us. A pleasure. Steve, as always, glad to have you with us. Thank you for watching, and good night.